What's up everybody, welcome back to the Naughty Dog Reviews. If you haven't seen the last video, basically we went over the first Crash Bandicoot game and how it is just an absolute dumpster fire of a platformer. No, but in all seriousness, it does seem a bit dated by today's standards, but it was a great first attempt, especially if you consider how new the genre was at the time. So since uploading that video, I decided that I'm going to go over the story in each of these games in this series, basically just so I can show the evolution of Naughty Dog's storytelling. So to start this off, I'm quickly going to go over the story of Crash Bandicoot 1, and then I'm going to lead that into Crash Bandicoot 2. So our story begins with a mad scientist named Dr. Neo Cortex, who has created a device called the Cortex Vortex that will turn animals into mindless slaves who he plans to use for world domination. Crash, being a bandicoot, a species well known for their brute strength, is a prime candidate for leading this army. Cortex's right-hand man, Embryo, warns him that the machine is not ready, but he continues regardless. To no one's surprise, the experiment fails, and Crash escapes by jumping through the window. He then washes up on an island known as Insanity Beach, and sets off on his journey. You know, I'm starting to think that Crash Bandicoot and Nathan Drake might not be so different after all. Okay, that's the last time I'll reference Uncharted in the Crash reviews. Probably. Anyways, once Crash finally gets back to Cortex, the two of them have a showdown on top of a blimp. Crash defeats Cortex, causing him to fall to his death. At least, that's what we thought, until Crash 2 picked up right where the first left off, showing that Cortex landed in a building that somehow negates any fall damage he would have otherwise taken. Inside, he finds a power crystal and decides he needs to find all of them in order to power his Cortex Vortex. His new right-hand man, Engine, points out to him that he has no friends, so he decides that he'll instead have to recruit an enemy. Cut to Crash and Coco, which is Crash's sister who replaced Tana from the first game because she was way too sexy for children. Coco's laptop dies and she needs new batteries for it, so obviously she sends Crash out into the woods to find some. All jokes aside, the story in this game is actually a nice improvement from the first one. A game like this really doesn't need to go out of its way to make an engaging story, but I still appreciate all the improvements made since last time. Cortex and a few other characters communicate with you throughout the story a lot more this time around, rather than in Crash 1 where you get introduced to the villain at the start and don't see him again until the very end. Both Embryo and Cortex will frequently communicate with you through a hologram, each telling you not to trust the other. Unfortunately, this game is called Cortex Strikes Back, so it isn't very difficult to figure out which one to trust. Nonetheless, it's still nice to see more interactions with Cortex to give him a more prominent role as the villain. So that's about it for the story so far, so let's talk about what people really enjoy this series for. It's gameplay. The gameplay is an improvement over the first game in every way. While Crash used to be limited to just jumping and spinning, he now has the ability to slide and even ground slam. Now the ground slam certainly has its uses, but the slide is really what makes movement feel more dynamic. You can combine the slide with a jump for higher and further jumps that allow you to reach areas that you couldn't have otherwise. And if you time it... And if you time it right, you can even add a spin at the peak of a slide jump to get even a little bit higher. Sliding also allows you to crawl, which can be used to duck under projectiles or get under smaller spaces. I know it really doesn't sound like much of a change, but these things really do make the game a lot more fun to play. Even aside from the new abilities, Crash just feels better to control in general. Jumps feel far less heavy than before, and you can now use an analog stick to go all 8 directions rather than the 4 that the D-pad allowed. The improved controls make any death really feel like it was your fault rather than being able to blame it on the bad game design. Basically, the controls are a whole lot better than they used to be, and it really makes the gameplay a lot less frustrating. But that's just one example of the things that have improved in this game. Crash 2's levels have far more to offer than any in Crash 1. This game started the Warp Room format that allows you to choose from 5 levels at once, meaning if you get stuck on a level, you can just go to another one and come back later. Instead of just playing through the levels and moving on, you now have various things to collect within them. Before, the only main collectible were the gems that you got for breaking every box within a level. Those have returned, but they are so much more fun to get in this game. Anytime that you hit a checkpoint crate, the game saves the amount of crates that you've broken within the level, which means you don't have to do it all in one life this time. But don't worry, that doesn't take away from the difficulty in this game. Most levels now have 2 gems to collect, one from breaking all the boxes, and one from either beating a death route or finding a secret. So the death routes are basically this game's way of following up on the whole not giving you the sweet satisfaction of being able to die thing from the last game. They usually show up about halfway through the level though, so it's a lot more achievable. These death routes can be really tough though. The platforms move faster, some spots require way more precise timing, and the music even speeds up just to make it that much more intense. The challenge is welcome though, because once you reach the platform that takes you to the death route, you can now access it even if you die. The only death route I can really remember torturing me is the one that's found in the level Cold Hard Crash. Beating this death route took me such a long time to do. Even going back here to record the footage from it reopened a wound that I thought had long since healed. You have to deal with the super slippery ice physics, the nitros that are placed super close together, platforms that'll smash you if you don't slide underneath them. Basically, you should avoid this at all costs. Even though this game has some seriously difficult moments, there is a silver lining to all of it. Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back has a proper save system. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this review. I give Crash Bandicoot 2 a 10 out of 10. Stay safe and goodbye. I am just kidding, guys. That is not the end of the review. But I got you, didn't I? Anyways, being able to save anytime you want is a dream come true for fans of Crash 1. No more having to replay levels that you've already completed, and no more having to beat a bonus round to save. In this game, all the challenge is fair and not just annoying like before. Making saving less of a chore makes everything difficult in this game much more manageable, even if you're going for 100%. In this game, it's much more engaging to go for 100%, and a lot of that is because of the secrets. The color gems in this game are found through secrets, and the secrets are really well made. All of these secrets have ways that the player could logically think of finding them without having to break away from the game and look it up on the internet. For an example, look at the green gem found in the level, the Eel Deal. If you walk into the side path in this level, you'll find a room that appears to be a dead end. But if it really were a dead end, then what would be the point of putting all those nitros in your way? One more example is in the level B Having, where you can find a staircase of nitros on your main path. Again, these are out of the way and would be pointless as an obstacle, so you're inclined to try and jump on them. Get it? Inclined. Because they make stairs. Some secrets in this game even lead to a secret warp room that has 2 brand new levels and 3 extra sections from already existing levels. The 2 new levels are essentially just harder variations of other levels, but they're still a lot of fun and are very satisfying to discover. The final collectible to talk about this game is the crystals. Crystals are the main collectible that you need to find to progress the story. They're always on your main path and you need to find them to move on to the next warp room. There's not much to talk about with crystals because they're always on your main path and you can't really miss them unless you intentionally avoid them. In fact, if you miss the crystal multiple times in the first level, Cortex will actually start to get frustrated with your stupidity.
Now, get back in there.
Anyways, with the collectibles out of the way, let's talk about the levels themselves. The levels in this game offer a lot more diversity in the gameplay department. Along with the regular platforming levels, you have some levels that have you ride a jetboard for part of them, and some where you ride a jetpack all the way through that, by the way, I think controls great, despite what other people say. There are also levels where you ride a polar bear, levels where you get chased by a polar bear, and levels where you ride a polar bear while being chased by a polar bear. The game does a good job of balancing the amount of platforming with the amount of vehicle sections. They serve as a good change of pace, but don't get in the way too much of the regular gameplay. This is one of the main reasons a lot of people prefer this game over the sequel, but more on that in the next review. While this game does have pretty diverse gameplay, the levels can feel a little similar at times visually. Don't get me wrong, this game has a lot of great level themes, it's just that the levels that share a theme don't have much else to separate them from one another. This isn't a huge issue though, as most of the themes that appear in multiple levels only do so in about 2 or 3 of them. One thing that really helps the level stand out though in this game is the soundtrack. Like I said in the last review, the soundtrack for Crash 1 really was just there to pull you into the atmosphere of the game. This game instead has tons of memorable tracks that give each level their own personality. For example, the music in the first level, Turtle Woods, has an easygoing sound to it and just makes you feel like you don't have to worry about this level being very challenging. But then you move on to a level like Crash Dash, and suddenly you're ripped away from the comfort of skipping through the forest and forced to run for your life accompanied by music that fills you with intense anxiety. Because of this, I do prefer this soundtrack over the first game. The music in Crash 2 is just so much more memorable, and I listen to it outside of just playing the game. Before I move on to the in-game stuff, I should probably talk about the boss fights a little bit. The bosses in Crash 1 are pretty much a complete joke, and in Crash 2, not much has changed. Okay, they actually are a decent improvement over the first game. While most of them are still really easy, they do have a stronger presentation this time. Seeing Tiny Tiger burst through the wall to start his fight with you just makes it all the more intimidating. Engine is by far the best boss in this game. He has several phases and is much more challenging compared to the rest of the bosses. Now, this fight's not going to ever end up on any top 10 video game boss fight list, but it still offers the best we've seen in this series so far. And unfortunately, the final boss in this game is by far the worst, even including the first game. All you do is chase Cortex on the jetpack while avoiding debris that won't even kill you, but it will merely slow you down. The only way to fail is if you don't reach him in time, which is highly unlikely because this fight lasts only under a minute. It's just a little disappointing because you expect a little bit more exciting of a Cortex fight from a game called Cortex Strikes Back. This fight is even easier than Papu Papu because at the very least he could damage you. It's just a little disappointing because Cortex was the best boss in the last game and now he's about the worst it can get. The last thing I want to talk about in this game is the 100% reward. Because of the improvements made to the difficulty and save system, collecting everything in this game is a much more worthwhile experience. Even people who usually don't bother to complete games will be likely to do so with this one. It just feels like you're missing out on so much the game has to offer if you decide not to. Collecting all of the gems rewards you with the game's true ending, which shows Crash and Embryo using all of the gems to destroy the Cortex Vortex once and for all. The true ending in this game is much more satisfying, as it leads directly into the sequel. I always thought it was weird how the normal ending in the first game led into the sequel, but the true ending was never followed up on in the story. Anyways, I think that's really all I have to say about this game. It does a great job at taking what the first game did and just improving upon it. Crash 1 was a pretty great first attempt at a 3D platformer, but Crash 2 turned this franchise into something truly special. I give Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back an 8 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. I put a lot of time into it, so it would really mean a lot to me if you did that. I hope you'll join me next time when I review Crash Bandicoot Warped. Until then, stay safe and I'll see you next time.